I'm Kevin O'Toole, and on February 24th, 2012, we're riding aboard Truck 9. We responded to a house fire just outside Bladensburg, Maryland. Myself and my officer, Ethan Sorrell, were trapped inside, and this is the story of our survival. I've been a fireman for about 6 years now, started right after high school. Consider myself pretty much born into it. My father's been a fireman for like 35 years. I grew up in the firehouse. He always brought me around. I found like the family aspect to be really appealing. And as I grew older, I got more involved with it. Started as a junior when an explorer, continued on, and eventually got to the age of 17. Graduated high school and moved to Prince George's County to fulfill the dream of being a fireman. I wanted to become a fireman because even with all its ups and its downs, it's still the best thing ever. You have good days, you have bad days, but on every single day, you can make a positive impact on somebody's life. Somebody you've never met before, go out and do something for them that can change their whole life, their day, and you do some awesome stuff. You're out there, you're fulfilling what you want to do. You're doing good things for people, but you're also doing badass shit for yourself. You're riding the big red fire truck, lights, sirens, you're driving, you go to the fire, you feel the heat, but you're doing something good. You're doing something for people you don't know, the community, but you're also having a great time doing it. You have guys in the firehouse that you rely on, you work with, you become a family with. Going back to the whole family aspect, you really do rely on these guys because when you turn to your left, you turn to your right, and it's all dark, and all you can make out is figures. You know who they are, and you know they're not going to leave you. You know they're going to be right with you, no matter what, from start to finish.
I grew up just southeast of Raleigh, North Carolina, a small town called Bowie's Creek. It was a small department. I grew up with my father, my brothers, my granddad. My dad and my granddad, they were in the fire department, so grew up hanging around a firehouse. 16 years old, I joined what is Bowie's Creek Fire Department. Stayed there until I was a senior in high school. I graduated high school, I moved to Prince George's County, Maryland. I originally moved up here and I started out at Heightsville Volunteer Fire Department. Came up here for the action, for the busy pace, the fire. That's why I came up here. It was more fire up here. Started at Heightsville. I spent a year and a half at Heightsville, and then I transferred over to Bladensburg. Everybody wants to be a firefighter to help people. I like the adrenaline. I like the, not knowing what's going to happen next. I like fighting fire.
I mean, it's kind of cliche that really it did start like any other day. All right. I was still living at home, so I was down there. It was banquet weekend, which is like an installation dinner, kind of like an awards dinner. So that's why I was there. There's a bunch of guys there. That's also why Ethan was there.
It was a bright, sunny day. It was cold. And then that afternoon, probably around lunchtime, the wind picked up, and it was a really strong wind. They put out fire warnings for the day, for fire watch warnings for strong winds. So we had advisories posted up all over the firehouse. County sent them down from the top. Told us if we run a fire, be on the best game because the winds were gusting up to 40, 50 miles an hour that day.
It was Friday, sitting around and just regular day, doing trainings, going to calls, same old thing. Later in the evening, we started to put up riding assignments, and I was assigned bar, which is irons or forcible entry, which is the one that forces the door, goes in, starts doing the search with the officer. And you look on the board that night, Ethan Sorrell was the officer, so it was me and him. That was our job, to go in there, do a search, work with the engine company, and our biggest thing was search and rescue, survival. Get in there for somebody that is trapped. They can't do anything for themselves at that point. We're their last hope. So, put your gear on the apparatus, you get all ready to go. Just hanging out with the guys. It's Friday night, trying to enjoy yourselves while being in the firehouse as much as you can.
That evening we ate supper, and then we had a board of directors meeting that night. I was sitting over in the board of directors room. It was also banquet weekend. The next day was our annual department banquet. So we had a lot of people came back to hang out and visit for the banquet, to spend there the night before to ride. So we were in the training room in the board of directors meeting. when the call was dispatched.
And that's when the page came over, 13 house, engine truck, which we got, a jump on it.
I remember there was probably 8 of us in the board of directors meeting, sitting in the back row. And I remember, it's funny to me now, but it was just like it was funny when it happened. There was people running across the tabletops trying to get out of the board of directors meeting.
So we ran out there, meeting everybody, running through. Everybody's throwing their gear on, jumping on the truck. Engine fires up, the truck fires up. Pull out of the firehouse. And as we're pulling out, the dispatch starts to go off from a house on fire in Riverdale Heights. We were assigned the second due engine and the first due ladder truck. So what happens is that area where the fire was, the fire station was closed. So we were all converging together on the same area. So we all got there. The first due engine got there the same time as us. So we get their engine, our truck. All right, so we're pulling up. The first due engine 7.2, went on scene with heavy smoke showing from the first floor and fire showing from the basement. Basement fires are the worst. Any fireman will tell you that actually goes to fires. You got to actually push through all the heat and the smoke and the fire to get to the seat of it. Some fires you just walk in, there you are, there it is. This one you got to go down pretty much a chimney to get to. So pull up, the truck air brake hits, jump, get off, start jogging up.
It was really strong wind. It was eerie. It was just an eerie feeling altogether. I remember we pulled up and it was, you knew what house was burning, but you couldn't. It was just smoke was lingering in the street, even with the wind blowing as strong as it was. It was just hanging down low in the street.
You couldn't see a thing. All right, you could make out figures, you could make out shadows and objects, and it was eerie because you really didn't hear much except people yelling, people pointing, people yelling. Like, all right, continue up, run into the first engine, they're stretching the hand line, flaking it out, come around them. First thing I noticed was a car in the driveway. All right, it's also things that firemen understand, concepts. That car in the driveway, the front door was locked, usually indicates somebody's inside. As we're coming up to a scene, we size it up. We notice things. We look at things. It paints a picture for us. You might see kids' toys in the front yard. You might see a bicycle. A car. Kind of understand that somebody's probably inside.
Got to the front door. It was myself and Kevin. I laid my helmet on the trunk of the car that was sitting in the driveway. Neighbors said that they don't know if anybody was there. They've seen people in and out over the last couple of days. So I figured, might be a possible rescue, so we made entry.
At the end, they say it's a vacant house, but you know what? Vacant houses just don't catch fire by themselves. Somebody has to be in there. Continue on. We got to the front door, putting all your stuff on, masking up. Knew it was going to be a good fire. You saw it, what we call good fires, one that you actually do a lot of work. It's going to be hot. It's going to be exactly what you want as a fireman. Nobody wants it easy. That's not why we spend so much time and effort working. Throw on a mask, throw on the gear, ready to go. People call it hectic. It's like it's a chaotic ballet of everything that's going on. There's certain steps, certain maneuvers that everyone's doing. Our job was to get with the engine company and push down those steps, put out the fire, and do searches. So, continue up the stoop. I remember Ethan grabbing me. He was turning around. He's trying to, call the command post on the radio and tell them, we're moving in with the engine company. We're gonna make the basement steps. So he turns around. We look at the engine. The line's charged. Ready to go. Give a thumbs up. They all, yep, we're good to go. So that's the last time I physically saw them. So moved in, under the impression of search and rescue. All right. What we could do quickly, in our mind, was search the first floor, which is our job. So I continued on, went inside. I remember hearing Ethan yelling, go to your left, go to your left. I was going towards the bedrooms where people are. He wanted that. So he's like, go to the left. I was like, all right, so I'll find the basement steps. We'll be good. Continuing on, I entered, at the time I thought was another room, because the way the front door opened, it swung in, and it felt like you were entering a second room. So it felt like I entered from a hallway into another room. Continued on. Smoke was about waist high. It wasn't too bad. You could see across the bottom of the floor.
You had a visibility from about waistline height all the way across the first floor. It was just a weird feeling because just thinking about it now, it was a weird situation altogether. You would think for a basement fire, smoke would be banked down on the first floor, but it didn't seem natural.
It starts to get black, really can't see much, so you start crouching down, you start getting lower. All right, so I felt feeling my way across the wall and get to the top of the steps. Instinctively, what we want to do is we want to cut off the flow of the fire, the smoke, and everything. So we want to close the steps of the basement, wait for the engine company. We'll go down together. We'll put the fire out, and there was no door. They had the door removed. So that was a bad thing because there's nothing between you and it, the fire.
Doing right-hand search, I've come into a little common area where 2 bedrooms and a bathroom met along with the living room. I hollered at Kevin, said I found another door, and about that time the heat started to increase. And I said, all right, so I heard Kevin off to my left, so I'm gonna go find Kevin and we're gonna reassess, find out what we need to do.
So I remember Ethan coming up to me, and it was a little weird. Some engine companies aren't too aggressive, but we figured, that one usually has a reputation that they are. So we figured they were right with us. Ethan comes up to me and goes, you have a flashlight? I was like, yeah. He's like, so I'm like, all right. So I'm fumbling and grab it, turn it on, and pitch black. All it did was flash back at you, and you're like, all right, this is, we'll be all right.
At this point, conditions had started to deteriorate. Called command asking for the hand line, asking where they were at, because I didn't hear anybody else. Didn't hear anybody else inside with us. I knew when we came in, the hand line was right behind us. I knew it came in. I was helping hump hose as we were going through the door.
He's asked me where 7 is. I'm like, yeah, they're not with me, because he went to the bedrooms. I went to the basement steps. I figured they were with me. He goes, all right, he goes back. And I believe he went back to go, grab the engine company and bring him in.
And I'm calling, 7, where's the hose line at? 7, bring the hose line to the rear, to the BC corner. Kevin and I were standing at the crossway between what was the kitchen, dining area into the living room. And at the time I didn't know it, but the basement stairs were directly to our right. Smoke conditions had gotten it had blacked out so much that I couldn't see the basement stairs.
A few seconds ago, I'm waiting at the top of the steps, and your ears start burning, your hands start burning just a little bit to know that it's good fire. And he comes back, and all you hear on the radio is 7, where's your line at? 7, where's your line at? He's trying to call them, the engine company, because we're at the point where we need to make a decision. Either we're going to make it down these steps with the hand line, we're going to put it out, or we're going to have to start changing the game plan. And waiting for that line to come, and it was probably only like 10, 15 seconds. You're waiting for it, and it feels like forever, but it wasn't there. And he's 7, where's your line at? 7, where's your line at? Then he breaks off again, and all of a sudden, you just felt something. You felt shit rapidly deteriorate. All of a sudden, like your back is burning, and your knees are burning. Something just escalated pretty quickly, and it's like it feels like it's a million bees stinging you, quickly, and it's like you're back, and like you realize something's wrong. So I'm like, I start yelling out to Ethan. I'm like, Ethan, back out. Let's get out. Let's get out. I figure we're gonna regroup. We'll get out to where I thought, out to the hallway, or out to the doorway. We'll get the engine company. We'll move back in. It'll be fine. We'll just get back to like a point of refuge. We'll regroup and we'll go back. And when I decided to turn and start to crawl, and that's when everything was heat. Everything was burning. Your legs, your feet, your arms, everything. So what I wanted to do was get as low to the floor as I could, and pretty much like army crawl as fast as I could to where I thought the door was. Ended up hitting the wall so hard on the front side of the house that it smashed the axe and fell into the basement. That's how hard you hit it. That's how bad we wanted to get out of that area. I remember screaming, "Open the hand line! Open the hand line! Open the hand line!" Like you go through months, you go through all these trainings, you go through Fire One, you go through in-house trainings, all these survival classes, and you know what this is. You know this is the upcoming steps of a flashover. There's things you can look at, but you just felt it like unbearable heat. You knew this was bad. You couldn't see a thing. That's why one thing you can do is either two things: get out or start spraying some water. We were trying to do both, and neither. We're still trying to accomplish getting out, and still trying to accomplish getting that line open, get that water flowing. I remember hitting the wall, and you heard a commotion, you heard loud noises, you heard yelling, you heard a lot of yelling, and then silence. And pretty eerie silence.
We got separated. I ended up finding my way on, finding the wall I came in on, and I hit the front door. The front door was closed. I remember fighting with the door, trying to get the door open, and like a little child throwing a temper tantrum, I was on my knees beating and banging on the door for somebody to open it. I was trying to get out on my radio. My radio was I don't know, it was like it was squelching. It was making a really loud squelch noise, so I couldn't key up, couldn't do anything with my radio. I dropped my tool, and when I panicked, I dropped my bar, the officer's bar.
So I'm screaming, I start screaming, Ethan, he's screaming to me. At this point, it's pitch black, you can't see a thing. It feels like you're in a huge warehouse. And he's screaming, to your left, come, to your left. I'm like, all right. So I start crawling across the wall. We run into each other. And this is just, the heat keeps, keep in mind, the heat just keeps ramping up. You feel it in your face, you feel it in your arms, you feel it in your legs, you feel it everywhere. And we grab each other, and this is kind of the moment when we realize we're alone. We realize that engine company is not with us anymore. And it was a pretty scary thought of going, all right, well, there goes one of our two options. Open the line or get out. And we only down to one. And here's where option 2 goes out the window. I grab him, he starts yelling at me, the door's no good. The door's no good. I was like, what the fuck do you mean the door's no good? He goes, I can't get it open. Found out when the engine company left, they closed the door with them. And what happened was the door started to melt into the frame. It like locked on itself somehow, or it started melting into the frame. Something happened. So kind of just sit there and like, fuck. What do we do? Gotta start, thinking. Gotta start thinking of something. He goes, all right. He's like, I'm gonna try the door again. I'm like, okay. He has a plan. We're good. Start getting as low as you can. You start like grabbing the floor, because at that point, we were SCBA, which is a Scott pack, which is air, and it's clean air from the outside. It's in a cylinder, and when air gets hot, it expands. So it starts moving around, it gets hot, and there's nothing you can do about it. So it comes through the system, and you start to breathe it in, and now you're breathing hot air. And one of the last things I wanted to do was breathe. It felt like someone was taking a scalpel and just cutting your throat every time you took a deep breath. So you just try to calm down. You just try to, all right, he's going to get the door open. We're going to get out, and we'll be good. We'll be fine. We'll still enjoy our banquet tomorrow. We'll still go outside. But fuck, that was a close one. So he's doing his thing with the door. And this could tell you how low I was. I put my arm all the way up, and I felt the windowsill. So that's how low we were to the ground. I put my arm all the way up and found the windowsill. I was like, all right. So, pulled back with the Halligan. Heard glass shatter. You had a big picture. You had windows in front of you, but it was so hot and so black inside, you couldn't see a thing. You couldn't see the lights of the truck. You couldn't see spotlights. You couldn't see or hear anything.
In that moment, when I heard windows breaking, I thought, well, either Kevin got out or we're about to be roasted. We're about to be burned alive in here. And I heard Kevin start screaming then. So I made my way over to Kevin.
Broke it out. I'm like, all right, Ethan, I got a window. We're good. We're getting out. As I go through it, unfortunately, I find out the window is only, yay big. And I'm yay big. So try to go through, last-ditch effort. It isn't happening. The last thing, only thing you want to do is get out. My arms outside, I'm screaming, yelling for help through the mask, yelling, screaming. Then comes up behind me, and I feel a push, and it's Ethan trying to push me through. I was like, screaming up, stop, it's no good, it's no good, it's no good.
The little window, he broke it, couldn't fit. It was too big for the window. The whole time, this entire time, I felt up and I put my hand on the window, but I never once knew it was a window. I thought it was a wall.
I'm like trying to push myself back in. He grabs me, and we're coming back in, and I got caught like a shard of glass or something. Got caught under my wrist, and it got caught under my glove and started to pull it off. So I kind of fall into a crouching position, glove half on. Shit's just getting worse and worse, and I'm trying to pull it back up. Feel that. I'm trying to pull it back up, and you gotta make a decision. Sit here and play with it, or you gotta make a move. There's three options you could do. You can either do the right thing, the wrong thing, or anything. You just don't want to do nothing. Sitting there would have been the worst thing. Screaming at him, he's like, "What's wrong?" I'm like, I was like, screw it. I threw it down, like, tried to cover it with my hands, and he's like, I'm screaming, I'm burning, I'm burning, I'm burning. My hand's burning off. And he's like, "What's wrong?" I'm like, my hand's burning off. They say like at the point the temperature was like 900 degrees in the room, climbing at floor level.
It started getting really bad, like really. That's when the fire really lit off. I looked down. I was laying on top of Kevin, trying to cover him up because his hand was exposed, and he's got his hand like tucked in between his legs, and he's laying on his side, kind of face down. So I'm laying on top of him, trying to keep him covered. He's screaming on the radio. I'm screaming just for anybody to hear us. So I was hoping somebody was gonna come in and start hitting the fire.
And at this point, I grabbed the radio and tried to give a mayday. And telling the story, it seems like it was a long time, but this was probably all unfolding in probably 30 seconds. All this happened. So it seems like it took forever for us to give a mayday. It was probably a little later.
It was only a matter of seconds that this whole incident happened, but the entire time it felt like, it felt like forever.
But came up, keyed open, and tried to get the best thing I could cross. It was truck 9 mayday, truck 9 mayday. And at the end, pretty sure between talking, it's if you hear it in the audio, it's actually God fuck help us.
Truck 809's DI.
Trying to do our best to get somebody out there, and he was trying to give a mayday. We hit our EIs, which are buttons that go to the dispatch center to let know somebody's in trouble. So at that point, we figured somebody knows something, what's wrong. The engine company is outside. They knew we went inside with them. I was hanging out of a window, and we gave a mayday the best we could. Figured the cavalry's coming. People are gonna be kicking in the door, grabbing you, pulling you out. And so that's what we figured at that point. So I remember Ethan kind of like pressing down on me, laying on top of me, because I remember yelling to him, I'm burning up, I feel like my hand's burning off. So he kind of like pressed on top of me, we're waiting for help to come, and it didn't come. Don't really know how long it was, but he jumped up, grabbed me, pulled up, we're face to face, and he's like, I gotta do something. I'm like, all right, he's like, I'm gonna find another way out. I'm gonna go out, another window. I said, okay.
I told Kevin, I said, I gotta go. I said, I gotta get us out. I gotta get us out.
He goes to me, he's like, do what you have to do to survive. I said, all right. He's like, I was like, I'll get to the door, and I'll do as much as what I can to keep alive, because at that point you knew this was probably it. You knew there's not much. It was going to take a miracle to get out. So he grabs me. He's like, I'm like, all right, well, let's go. And he's like, all right, he said I I promise you I'll come back. He's like, he said, I promise I will come back for you. It's like, all right.
I was able to self-extricate and bail out the window that he originally smashed, broken out. He originally broke out. When I jumped out, I landed on top of, my mask and everything was glazed over at this point. I couldn't see out of it. But I noticed as I was going out the window, I saw something move underneath me. And I ended up landing on top of another person, another firefighter. It was a member from 7.
Unfortunately, it was so hot, even regularly, sweating, the mask moves around and everything. The last thing you want to do is lose your seal, which keeps all the bad stuff out, the heat, the smoke, and everything. So I took my right hand and I held the regulator, which is part of the mask, and I held it to keep that on my mask, on my face. So unfortunately, the only thing I had left was my left hand, the hand that was exposed now, and I had to move across the wall, trying to, what it felt like forever to get to this door, which is probably only 2 or 3 feet. Keep crawling, you're still hearing everything. You're still, conscious of everything that's going on around you. You hear Ethan go out the window and you hear him screaming. You hear him screaming for help. Somebody get the fuck in there. He's screaming that I'm still alive. So keep moving past, hold my mask together. Keep moving, like, all right, stay alive. Stay alive, Kevin, stay alive. And all these things start running through your head, real quick. And like, it's kind of another cliche that you start thinking about everything. Like life flashes before your eyes, but you really think about what matters. You really think about your family, your friends, your brothers, the ones you love, and you just, what I did, started picturing life. You kind of like keep motivated, keep moving. This is all happening so fast. All the screaming, the yelling, the heat. Oh my God, I'm about to die. You start thinking, what? You're trying to think of stay alive, but it didn't really help me. Stay alive, stay alive. What really I thought about was, leaving things behind. My family. I was 4 hours away from my family. Like they're gonna, see me again. My friends. The guys at the firehouse. It's like, kind of like leaving them, and that's what said. You can't do this. You're 21 years old. You have so much life, and it's not supposed to go this way. And that's what I thought about when I kept shuffling across the wall. And at this point, it was just so unbearably hot. Like, you just felt it. You felt everything was on fire. And you'll soon get to that point. I feel across, and I get to the door, and you feel it. You feel a difference because the door's melting, opposed to the sheetrock. You hear the screaming. I'm like, all right, I'm here. I got to I got to the door, and now I just need to stay alive. You hear the screaming outside. I'm like, all right, they're coming. And kind of just, best that I could do was curled up into a little ball. You don't want to be spread out, or you want to just be the smallest you could in that situation. And I started to notice was my mask started. You could see it changing. You could see it, pretty much. You could see it failing. And a few months prior, I took a rapid intervention, save your own class, and one of the things they kept emphasizing was never take your mask off. That's your last line of survival. You can get burned in your arms, your hands. You can burn everything, but if you burn your airway, you get one breath, and that's it. So I was like, all right, don't take the mask off. People panic, people rip it off. I'm like, we got to keep it on, and it started to melt. So I slid my hand up a little further, tried to protect it so it wouldn't fail on me, because I knew I only had seconds. You close your eyes, and you hear the screaming. Still nobody was there yet. You're like, all right. Start thinking about the inevitable. This is it. You're about to die. And close your eyes. Thinking I'm about to die. This is it. Goodbye. Open my eyes, and from what I could still see through the mask is like, you can see flickers of orange, which is the flames coming out of the smoke. Then close your eyes again. You're like, all right, this is really bad. This is it. Open your eyes again, and it was just all orange, from what I could see. And you knew that the whole room was on fire. The video that the fire was coming out the windows, we broke out. So the whole room top to bottom, left to right, floor to ceiling was on fire. That's what we call in the profession a flashover.
I remember getting out in the front yard. It was smoke was, well, I thought it was smoke. I don't know. It might have been my mask glazed over, but couldn't see anything. I saw the glow off of the lights from the trucks, and then the fire. I could see an orange glow behind me. And I remember screaming and just hollering for somebody. Kevin's inside. I need help. Somebody help me. And I didn't hear any responses. I didn't see anybody moving. I couldn't see. I couldn't make out people. I could hear it sound like people talking. I don't know if it was radios squelched, if radios were talking. I don't know what it was, but I was able to find the front door, and where we initially made entry at, and the front door was closed shut. And by this point, my regulator was messed up. It was all, I went to clip it off so I could holler, so I could yell louder. And when I went to take it off, it was stuck in my glove. I remember pulling as hard. I had to yank it away from my glove. By this point, I didn't have an airway secured, or I didn't have my airway, safe. And all I was thinking about was Kevin. He's still inside. He's still inside. I knew where he was at. I knew exactly where he was. So I kicked the front door in, and as I'm trying to jar the door open, it's like resistance. Something was bouncing back, and it ended up being Kevin. But I was able to got the front door open, and I guess when I opened it, he kind of rolled him over some. But I remember as soon as I opened the door, it was just heat and fire. It was all I could see at this point was orange.
As soon as that happens, maybe a few moments later, I feel something hit me in the back. And it was the door that Ethan ended up kicking in, the front door. And when it hit me, it kind of pushed me up, fell back, and I was like, all right, that's good. Either somebody's here. They're kicking in the door to get me. Door comes in again, ends up rolling me, getting under my arms, and somehow, he drags me out.
I dropped on my belly immediately, and all I could think was, try and tuck my nose cup underneath my coat, try and find some clean air. I remember I just took one deep breath and went in, and I was laying on my belly, and I kind of did a breaststroke. I swung my arms out, and when I swung my arm out to the left, I hit something. I was like, all right, that's a body. So I knew it was Kevin. So I was able to sit him up. At this point, I had to stand up. I'm sitting him up, and I'm, fire's still rolling over our head. He's not talking. He's not moving. Didn't hear anything coming from him. I thought he was dead, and I got out front. I got outside. I was, I'm dragging him out in the front yard. By this point, members from Heightsville had arrived. They were the second new truck, and the rescue squad was there as the RIT company. And they had gotten on scene at this point. And when I'm coming out the front door, members from Heightsville were right there with me, and they were helping pull him over the hose and everything, because I was exhausted. I remember trying to lift him up over the hose, and I could barely lift myself over the hose. And I got out in the front yard, and we're out in the front yard. I still think I'm in the house because everything was black. I could still smell that nasty smoke. It wasn't a normal smell from a house fire. It was just weird, acrid smoke, and I could smell it. I couldn't. At this point, I'm like, all right, I'm okay. I'm able, I'm still able to move and function. I remember dropping Kevin. I'm thinking, I gotta find some water. I'm thirsty. I need some water. I'm really thirsty. And I ripped my mask off, and I looked down. Everybody was, panicking. Everybody was just everywhere. And the water coming off of the truck, coming off the pump from the hydrant to the truck was, running off on the side of the street. I remember just falling to my knees and just dropping my face in the water that had puddled up in the corner, in the curb, and just trying to drink water. And I'm trying to drink water, and I I couldn't drink water. And I sat up on my knees and I turned around. I remember looking over my back, over my left shoulder, and I saw everybody's, ripping Kevin's gear and stuff off. And I didn't ever hear him scream. I didn't hear him talk. The whole time I thought he was dead. I remember thinking, just he's dead. It was a hard time because it was hard. I was thinking I left him in there alone. I left him alone. I should have died with him.
At that point, the pain was so bad that I became numb. They said I went into shock. It just it was weird. You heard a lot of screaming, you heard yelling, you heard saws, and you heard unmuffled voices. So you knew they didn't have masks on. So you kind of was trying to figure out what was going on. I wasn't sure if I was out of the house or in a hallway. And you hear people yelling, screaming, just pick them up and move them, just pick them up and move them. And I believe that was the firemen off of Truck 1, Hyattsville. They were the second new truck. They were picking me up and literally moving me. And somebody actually grabbed the hand line, I believe, from Engine 7. They grabbed the hand line because both of us were still on fire. Remember, put us out. You heard the screaming. They opened the line. They put us both out. They start moving us. And I just remember just trying to take it all in. Everybody's, chief screaming at me, is anybody else inside? Is anybody else inside? And they're trying to pull my mask off. I'm trying to answer, but I wasn't sure where I was. So I kept yelling, kept trying to fight with them not to take my mask off. I wasn't sure because couldn't see anything anymore. I wasn't sure if I was still inside or whatever. And that was the last thing I wanted to do after fighting through all that was them to rip my mask off, and that was it. They're screaming at me, you're outside, you're outside. So, they pull off the mask, you turn, you see fire blowing out of the roof of the house. And it kind of just sets in for a second. It goes, all right, you're still here. It's still, still kicking. And I remember looking around, you see, a bunch of guys from, Hyattsville and one guy from College Park, a chief, and everybody yelling at you. And you really just trying to take it all in, like you're awestruck. And I remember Kyle Schultz, who's a really good friend of mine, standing over me. And apparently you couldn't recognize who I was. My helmet shield was melted. My gear was black. Everything was all, destroyed. And no one knew who it was. And ripped off the mask. So they saw it was me. They realized it was Ethan and I. And kind of just looking up, like you see the fear in people's faces. Like no one really knows how to handle the situation. It doesn't really happen. It doesn't happen often, and when it does, it's really bad like this. So talking to him, he's like, what hurts the most? What hurts the most? I'm like, my hands. And I still haven't looked down. I'm still looking at him. He's like, all right, he's talking to me. He's like, what happened? And I remember saying, I don't know. It happened so fast. He goes, okay, all right. And he's like, what can we do? I was like, get the sky pack off me because it burned into my shoulder. At that point, you knew it was bad. You knew something was terribly wrong. Then I remember looking down and just seeing what used to be my hand, what used to be my left hand, and half of it was black. The skin was melting off, landing on my pants and on the grass, and see that you see the bones sticking out of my hand, like where my fingers used to be. And you realize, all right, this is really, really bad. So they cut off my right glove, and not to be too graphic, but a pool of skin comes with it. Our gear is only rated for so many degrees. It starts to fail at a certain point, and you still get burned. It's a real high degree, but it's only for like 10 seconds that it can stand. So you see that, they're cutting off the pack and like the sliding. But people are like trying to talk to me. The radio's melted. Nobody can figure anything out. It's like it was mayhem. But the guys around me were still trying to be as calm as they could with me. They sat me up. They cut the pack off. They're trying to cut my coat off. I was like, we just ended up pulling it off and looking down. All you saw was blisters, and the skin went with it, with the coat. And talking, still trying to focus on Kyle. And he's like, we're going to get you to the burn center. We're going to get you checked out. You're going to be good. You're going to be all right. I'm like, okay, all right. And you just start looking down, and you're like, no, this is bad. This shit does not happen. And, the yelling, they're bringing over a stretcher. They slid the pants off, like, they cutting your pants off. And, like, one of the stupid things, I was like, I don't want, there's pictures taken. I was like, the last thing I want is a picture of me naked right before I die, laying across this front lawn. So I was like, don't take my pants off. Don't take my pants off. So like, all right. I was like in denial a little bit of, I don't know if it's denial or just focusing on my hands. That I was like, no, my legs are good. I'm good. So they get me in the back of the stretcher, on the stretcher, and they're wheeling me down the street. And, people are trying to talk to me, keep me calm. I'm like, it really didn't hurt. It was just numb all over. So it was numb all over, and I remember going down the street, and you see guys coming up, like staring at you, like, kind of like, oh shit, like everybody knew something bad happened, but no one really knew exactly what happened yet. So wheeling me down, and we ended up getting in an ambulance, and like we're blocked in. So the people are screaming at each other. A ladder truck blocked the ambulance in. People, at each other's throats screaming because everybody knows this is a bad situation. So like, somebody comes over like, calm down. We'll take him out of the ambulance, put him in another one. So take me out. They're wheeling me through. We get in the ambulance, EMT, and now the medic jumps in. I'm like, okay. Still looking down. Looked at the medic. I was like, what can I do? What can I do to help you? And she's like, just keep breathing. I'm like, okay. I was like, told her I kept my mask on. I didn't take any breaths of the heat and the smoke. All right. They start like cutting my clothes off. They start cutting the shirt off, and like they're trying to be like discreet as I could, like because like all the burning in my back and everything, like 3rd-degree burns, like they didn't want to tell me. You looked down, you saw the blisters and everything. You saw your hands, you knew they were bad, but like you didn't see anything else. So continue on. We start to go to the hospital, and like she starts an IV, and I'm still trying to talk to him, like, what can I do? She's like, just don't stop breathing. You'll be all right.
And this time, Lieutenant Adam Cole, he was lieutenant on the engine company from Bladensburg. They were the second new engine. He gets there, and he's picked me up off the street, and he set me on the bumper of Seven's wagon. And I remember he's trying to stick a nasal airway in my nose because I remember him coming up to, he's sitting me up, and he's like, "What's wrong?" And all I'm thinking is, I'm pointing at my mouth. I'm like, I couldn't say words. I couldn't make sound. And the whole point in time, I'm sitting there, I'm trying to breathe, and I remember just being able to move a little bit of air through my nose, and that was it. And next thing I know, I remember I wake up, and he's got this nasal airway shoved in my nose, and I remember I started fighting with him because it hurt. I remember how bad it hurt. I wake up, and I'm on the way to the hospital.
So we're flying to the hospital, and one of the things that I took upon myself was like, I was literally afraid my hands were going to melt into like a ball. That's how bad they were. You saw them dripping off. So I was like, one of the things I could do is just keep moving them. Just keep moving them, keep everything, intact and keep it moving. And what they said was that probably saved my hands. Afterwards in the hospital and everything, they wanted to actually amputate my left hand for a while. But what I did was when I kept doing that, I kept like the ligaments and the tendons, everything still moving. So go to the hospital, we're flying there, and they put oxygen on me. They do the whole 9 yards, and you're just like, all right, it's starting to set in. This is just the beginning of a very bad day, a very bad night. And that's when I was still in denial about I still didn't tell anybody about my legs. You knew they were burned. You knew something was wrong, and one of the most important parts you're nervous about. So I was like, I didn't really say anything. They were more focused on my back, make sure I was breathing, my hands and everything. So we're still in the medic unit going, and they cut my pants. And when they peeled the pants, it was like really hot bubble gum on a summer day. You get it on your shoe and the ground, and that's what it was. And I was like, all right, this is just getting worse and worse. And you start noticing your legs are burned. You're like, yeah. This is probably the worst thing ever. So we got there, and like they're trying, like in the back of the ambulance, like, you're good, you'll be all right. We're going to the burn center. We're going to MedStar. They're the best. You're in great hands. I'm like, okay, like they They already called him. They got the surgeon's coming down. Like everything's gonna be all right. I'm like, okay. So we get there. We pull up and open the back doors, and Kyle drove. He drove the engine there, but in the front yard, when I grabbed him, I was like, "Please don't leave me." I was scared for my life. This doesn't happen. You're not used to this. You're not ready for it. Who could really say they're ready to die? So grab him, like, "Don't leave me." He goes, "Okay." So he left the engine, told somebody else, take care of it. Drove the ambulance to MedStar in DC. Opens the door, and he said that I looked all right going in. And he said when he opened those doors, I looked like I was close to death, which I was. But to see his face, go, oh, shit. And it was still okay, still everything was numb, still processing it. Like, I didn't even feel her start the IV, and usually, you feel that. I come out, and when the wheels of the stretcher dropped, they hit the floor and they jolted me, and I hit my back into the stretcher, and the pain kicked back in. All right, this is real bad.
I arrived at the hospital and I woke up. I remember I woke up because the drop from the stretcher wheels hitting the ground. It jarred me, woke me awake, or kind of brought me back to. And going in the door to the hospital, to the ER, the trauma center at MedStar, and they had three little, bed bays or whatever in there, or trauma bays in there. And they were taking me into the first one. And as I'm going through the door, I remember the whole time all I was concerned about was Kevin. The entire ride to the hospital, everything. I'm just thinking, how's Kevin doing? Where's Kevin at? When I got to the hospital, going in the doors, and I saw him pulling the curtains closed into where Kevin was at on the bed. And at the same time, I'm hearing the nurses saying, "Yeah, he's the worst one." They were talking. Originally, they thought I was the worst one because they had tried intubating me in the ambulance. They weren't able to intubate me because my airway was closed off too tight. But I remember getting in the hospital, and I got this burst of energy, and I tried to get off the stretcher because I wanted to go into Kevin's room. I wanted to see Kevin. I wanted to see him because I didn't know if he was dead. I didn't know if he was alive. And the firefighters that rode in with me on the ambulance, and then the medics and the nursing staff had to, restrain me down to the bed, and they were actually holding me down on the bed, fighting with me, because all I wanted to do was go see Kevin.
It is like a scene from like ER. I've never seen that before, where the doors open, everybody's with their, the gowns on, the masks on, probably like 20 people, 20 nurses, doctors, surgeons, everything, and they wheel you in, and like everybody's looking at you, and like. It's awful. When on the way in, really, it should say "Welcome to Hell" above it, because it's a fireman's worst nightmare. You know what you're getting into when you sign up. You know what you're getting into every call you go on. Just you don't think about it. You try not to. You respect the fact that you could end up there, but you don't dwell on it. You don't think about it. You don't keep it as a constant reminder. You go there, and it's probably the worst thing you want to ever experience in your life. You don't want to experience it, but it's hell for firemen. It's your worst nightmare. It's awful for anybody, but it's even worse for us because this is what we fight against. This is what we willingly go into. It's probably the worst thing you can ever imagine.
I remember they moved me over to the bed. Everything was just uncomfortable. I'm laying on the hospital bed, and next thing I know, they're strapping my hands down, they're strapping my legs down because I'm still fighting with them, trying to get up off this bed to go see Kevin. I wanted to see Kevin. And next thing I know, I wake up. It happened on Friday night, the fire did. Next thing I know, I wake up and it's Sunday morning. I didn't know how Kevin was. I didn't know who was alive, who was dead. I didn't know what was going on. I woke up and my parents were standing over top of me. And I remember trying to, because it was just uncomfortable. I was intubated at this point. I had a tube down my throat, and I remember trying to touch my face, and I couldn't move my hands. I was still restrained in bed, so they were fussing with me to stop me, or that I was tied down. I couldn't do anything. And I remember at this point, I finally come, I was off the medicine had started to wear off. So I was able to understand things more. They said Saturday I was in and out of consciousness, but it was all it was all drugs. I was so loopy, I was so drugged up, I don't remember anything from Saturday. But I woke up Sunday, and the first thing I had to write everything down on pen and paper or on a piece of paper. The first thing I asked was, "Where's Kevin? How's Kevin?" And it wasn't until Sunday night, it was about Sunday afternoon, about 3:30, that I was able to actually see Kevin. When I saw him, I remember he was bandaged up. He looked like a mummy. He looked like he'd been mummified or whatever. Stayed intubated in the hospital till Monday night. They removed the tube Monday night after they went in with a camera going down my airway to see how bad the burning, the charring and stuff was in my esophagus, and they pulled the tube out Monday night. Tuesday morning, it was just become like a normal day in the hospital, or a normal day at the hospital, I guess. I was up. I spent a lot of time in Kevin's room, and Tuesday night was when I was actually released from the hospital.
I ended up spending 55 days in the burn center, half of which was in the ICU, and then the other half which is just in the burn center itself. Throughout the course of those 55 days, I went through 10 surgeries just to replace all the skin with skin grafts and everything, like my arms, my legs, my hands, and just the regular everyday physical and occupational therapy. One of the biggest things we wanted to do was get me up and walking within a few days to make sure my legs, still worked and I could still walk. And then they worked on the biggest things, putting my body back together. That was the biggest first few surgeries. Walking, putting my hands back on me, stuff like that. And eventually down the road, surgeries 8, 9, and 10 were just, to refine things, to make sure my hands would still work, hopefully one day. And throughout the course of it, in the beginning, they told me I wasn't going to survive. I wasn't going to live the night. Then it was, I might live the first week. Through all the fluid shifts, my organs shutting down, blood clots, all this stuff, it was pretty close for a while. The next thing was I would probably never walk. I'd be bedridden for the rest of my life. My knees won't work. And after that, after I started walking, the next thing was I wouldn't have hands. And I woke up one day after surgery, and they had my hand all wrapped up, and I started freaking out that they cut my hand off, which was a real possibility. But now they tried their best. They kept it there. Kept my hand. So after like the first 2 weeks, still alive, could walk. Walked every day. Still had hands. Couldn't use them though, but I still had them. After that, next thing was I would never use my left hand at all. Like, okay, so I started moving my fingers and stuff. I'd still never probably do anything with my right hand. Continue on with that. Started using my hands. Then one of the things the doctors feared was I wouldn't really have a life. Outside of going home, sitting in a chair. Being 21 years old, not be able to do anything. So continued on. Fought through that. And when they were ready to discharge me, ready to send me home to continue, they told me to never expect to really use my hands for anything. I could move them, I can manipulate things, but never actually use them like in real life things. And the last long shot, they told me never to expect to ride a fire truck ever again for the rest of my life. And that was the hardest. You tell somebody that's 21 years old, 21, most people never encounter anything like this, and you have to face the biggest challenge of your life at 21 years old and be told the one thing you love to do in life, you're never ever going to do it again. Well, here we are now, so push through that and push through everything else.
I was released from the hospital, and I'm walking out of the room in my hospital, or walking out of my hospital room. I said my goodbyes to Kevin. I'm going back. I was going back to the firehouse. My parents, we were going to stay in Maryland one more night, and then we were going home the next day. had to force me to go home. The doctors told me I had to go home. I wasn't allowed to stay at the firehouse. So I had to go back home to North Carolina, but I'm walking out the hospital, the burn unit, and as the doors opened up into the hallway, there stood 22 firefighters and officers and the chiefs. They were all standing there, and that took me back a lot because and one of them walked up and said, "We brought you in here as a family. We're taking you home as a family." I walked down, got on the elevator. There's 12 of us in this little elevator, and we're all packed in there. And I get outside, and I look out, step out in front of the hospital, and there's all the fire trucks are out there. I went up, and they told me to get back in my seat as the officer of the truck, and I went home. Came back to the firehouse, and then for the next 2 months after that, it was spending every day going to the hospital to see Kevin, my own rehabilitation stuff. It was 2 months of not being able to ride a fire truck, which killed me, but it was good to help me kind of recollect myself and get back in the hang of things.
When I got discharged from the hospital, I came home. Continued with occupational therapy 3 times a week. So many doctor's visits, all this crazy. In and out of the burn center. Finding out still healing, still had open wounds, still had parts of my hand missing. I ended up going for 3 more surgeries, which they actually amputated parts of my fingers. My thumb, my pinky, I'm missing parts. They also went through some plastic surgeries to refine things to make it look a little better. And one of the biggest things is having a good group of friends here. Had friends originally, and I moved on. I found new friends. A good mix of people that continue to push me through, continue to help my recovery to get me back to trying to be who I was before. Feeling that things can get back to normal as much as I can.
3-4 months, I wasn't able to take deep breaths. I have to take short, shallow breaths some. But over time, it eventually it got back to where it was normal. But I have developed mild asthma from that.
People try to put numbers around it, say that just to survive a flashover as a fireman is less than 5%, or somewhere around there, which is ridiculously small percentage. But what I've always wondered is, what is the percent of surviving, continuing on with life, and going back to doing what you love? I don't even know if they could put a percent on that, to be faced with all these odds and all these fight against all the odds, and still be here and still be able to continue doing what you love, and just keep on making every day the best.
Hi, I'm Steve.
I'm Sean.
I'm Dave, and we're the Into the Smoke crew.
We want to thank all of our fans for helping make Season 1 of Into the Smoke a success. We couldn't have done it without you. A lot of you already know who we are and what we do. If you haven't already heard of Into the Smoke, we tell the stories of firefighters who put their lives on the line every day to protect their communities. We spent the last year not only riding alongside them, but capturing the dangers of the job from their point of view. We want to continue to share these stories with you and with the world.
However, this first season was tough. We dealt with more than our share of equipment failures and other issues. From gear to fuel to repairs, everything was paid for entirely out of our own pockets. At this point, much of the gear used to film Season 1 needs significant repairs or outright replacement. Problems like these have limited what we can do, and with your help, we plan to change that.
So we're here to talk to you about Kickstarter. Kickstarter is a crowdfunding website to help us raise money to make the second season of Into the Smoke even better than the first. It will pay for the equipment, fuel, food, and repairs we need that will allow Into the Smoke to continue to succeed. To be clear, the amount we're asking for doesn't ask you to pay us anything. It's only to cover the costs of production. That money will provide the tools and resources that we need to make Into the Smoke the best it can be.
Any amount of money helps. Every donation gets us closer to our goal.
We're asking you to donate whatever you can, if you can spare it.
Into the Smoke has been a huge part of our lives for the past 2 years.
But we need your help to keep the vision alive.
Once again, thank you for making the first season a success. We hope to continue to tell the stories of America's bravest with Season 2 of Into the Smoke.